Quoting Spinoza, "For no one has thus far determined the power of the body." At this point in our reflections, it seems as though ecological puritanism might be the only reasonable morality on board the spaceship Earth. We can make of this what we will, but it is clear that during the 20th century, a new form of the absolute imperative has emerged. You must change your life. This principle is authoritative for many contemporary ethical institutions. We realise that we are obligated to cultivate a modus vivendi that corresponds to the ecological cosmopolitan insights of our civilization. This imperative becomes so noticeable that we could liken it to what in earlier times was achieved and is still being achieved by Buddhist, Stoic, Christian, Islamic and humanist ethics, respectively with their significance for both individuals and communities. Because the new imperative, like every great ethical phenomenon, appeals to everyone, we should expect a rampant wave of ethical enthusiasm around the world. In this enthusiasm, the current will to live is combined with the current sense for what is good and proper into a powerful élan that will perhaps shake the world, both within and outside of traditional religions. It is just as realistic to expect a complementary wave of resignation, defeatism, and a cynical devil-may-care attitude. At first sight, it thus seems as if the current imperative could only result in an ethics of global moderation. Perhaps the only question that remains open is whether the turn towards modesty will happen as a result of voluntary reduction by populations in emission-intensive cultures, or whether the governments of affluent nations, for want of global governance to this point, the only macro systems capable of action, will find themselves sooner or later compelled to proclaim a kind of ecological martial law in which their respective territories, under which what cannot be achieved on a voluntary basis, will be imposed instead. If we reconsider matters, it becomes clear that the demands for a global ethics of moderation, or even the hopes for a climactic socialism, are illusory. Not only is all of expressionistic civilization's momentum against it, they also contradict our knowledge of what drives higher cultures. In other words, these driving forces are inconceivable if we do not grasp the connection between striving for self-preservation and the will of self-advancement. The link between self-preservation and self-advancement includes the preliminary decision in favour of a culture in which abundance, waste and luxury have achieved civil rights. In his reflections on the establishment of an ideal polity, Plato soon had to drop the hypothesis of a frugal polis. The wisest of the Greeks had no answer when Glaucon objected to the description of a meal in the frugal city by bluntly asking, quote, "If you were founding a city of pigs, Socrates, isn't that just what you would provide to fatten them?" End quote. Socrates has to concede this objection and permit the construction of an opulent city. Similarly, in all of our prognoses and projects for the world of tomorrow, we are today compelled to proceed from the fact that human beings in rich nations consider their affluence and its technological premises to be the irrevocable spoils of conquest. They remain convinced that it is evolution's job to make their material affluence and expressive privileges into global phenomena via continuous growth. They will refuse to put up with a future that is founded on negative growth and restraint. In contrast, the proponents of the new modesty object that sooner or later, those who are affluent today will have to accept the ecological facts. To the extent that large numbers of new producers and consumers join the club of profligates, the limits of emission and of expression become increasingly dramatic and become conspicuous even more quickly. The principle that forms the basis of all arguments for limiting growth here comes into play. There is only one unique Earth, and yet the rich nations of the world today live as if 1.5 or 2 more Earths were there to be exploited. If their lifestyle were to be extended to everyone who inhabits the planet, humanity would need no less than 4 Earths at its disposal. Since, however, the Earth represents a single monad that cannot be multiplied, we must accept the priority of limits over the impulse to transgress those limits. At first, this argument seems undeniable. As long as the Earth and its biosphere are conceived of as an irreplaceable singularity, the exploitative behaviour of modern expressive and comfortable civilization must seem like an unpardonable irrationality. The way human beings have treated the planet is then comparable to a disaster film in which rival mafia groups engage in a firefight with high-caliber weaponry on board a plane at 12,000 metres. At the same time, it is legitimate to ask whether the right consequences have been drawn from the monadological interpretation of the Earth. Do we understand our situation correctly if we conceive of the planet and its biosphere as a singularity that cannot be multiplied and as something that is ultimately fixed? We should remember that it is no longer merely a matter of the primal cosmological datum, Earth, and its primal evolutionary phenomenon, life. The technosphere, which for its part is animated and moderated by a noosphere, has been added to our basic parameters in the course of social evolution. In view of both of these parameters for growth, we are justified in applying Spinoza's statement that no one has thus far determined the power of the body, that is, the human body, to the Earth. No one has thus far determined the power of the Earth as a terrestrial body. We do not yet know what developments will be possible if the geosphere and biosphere are further developed by an intelligent technosphere and noosphere. It is not possible a priori that such further developments will lead to effects that amount to a multiplication of the Earth. It is not impossible a priori that such further developments will lead to effects that amount to a multiplication of the Earth. Technology has not yet spoken its final word. If it has mostly been considered in terms of environmental degradation and biogenerativity, this shows that in some respects it is only just beginning. A while ago I suggested distinguishing between heterotechnics and homeotechnics, with the first based on violating and outwitting nature, and the second based on imitating nature and pursuing natural principles of production in artificial contexts. A completely different image of the interplay between environment and technology emerges with the conversion of the technosphere to a homeotechnological and biomimetic standard. We would learn what the Earth, as terrestrial body, is capable of the moment human beings reorganize their handling of it from exploitation to co-production. If we follow the path of sheer exploitation, the Earth will forever remain a finite monad. If we follow the path of co-production between nature and technology, a hybrid planet could result on which more would be possible than conservative geologists believe. Around the world, creative thinkers in the environmental movement have put forth similar ideas. They have reckoned that a doubling of affluence could be achieved by halving our consumption of resources. Along similar lines, an offhand remark by Buckminster Fuller suggests a link between the miraculous multiplication of bread loaves and the metaphysically interpreted history of technology. Quote, "By virtue of leverage principles, it is literally possible to do more with less. Possibly it was this intellectual augmentation that Christ was trying to teach in the obscurely told story of the loaves and the fishes." End quote. The conclusion to his operating manual thus includes an appeal to the ethos of creativity. Quote, "So, planners, architects, and engineers, take the initiative. Go to work, and above all, cooperate, and don't hold back on one another or try to gain at the expense of another. Any success in such lopsidedness will be increasingly short-lived. These are the synergetic rules that evolution is employing and trying to make clear to us. They are not man-made laws. They are the infinitely accommodative laws of the intellectual integrity governing universe." End quote. We must guard against reducing these statements to the naivety that they exhibit. If the great autodidact is to succeed in keeping the emissions of ignorance within limits, this will only happen thanks to the intellectual integrity of all those who today assume the responsibility for their positive knowledge and their dark prognoses.